All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're tackling something that literally affects every single one of us, every single day, the tale of two wallets. Have you ever wondered why governments can seemingly spend billions of dollars they don't even have, while you and I have to meticulously balance our checkbooks at the end of the month? Well, today we're going to unpack the fascinating world of public finance versus private finance.
So here's our roadmap. We're going to define the wallets, look at how they're two sides of the same coin, and then see exactly where those paths diverge. After that, we'll get into the goods we buy, tackle spillovers and free riders, and finally explore a really interesting gray area. Let's get to it.
Starting with Section 1, defining the wallets. We really need to ask the most basic question here. Whose money is it anyway?
The fundamental difference comes down to who holds the purse strings, and more importantly, why. Public finance is, quite literally the people's money. Its entire objective is to serve the nation and maximize social welfare. It's the people's money for the people's welfare. But on the flip side, private finance, that is all about personal or business money. It's laser-focused on private goals, maximizing personal benefit, or if it's a business, making a profit. So one serves the nation, while the other serves the individual or the firm.
Moving on to Section 2. Two sides of the same coin, because believe it or not, these two totally different wallets actually have a lot in common.
What's super interesting here is that despite the massive difference in scale, governments and households follow very similar economic rules. Think about it. Both need rational spending, right? A government wants to avoid excess subsidies, just like you try to avoid those 2 a.m. impulse buys online. Both deal with limited resources and the need for optimum utilization. If a family faces a job loss, they cut costs. When a government hits an economic slowdown, they also have to tighten their belts. Both need effective administration, whether that's a government ministry budgeting and monitoring accounts, or you using a budgeting app on your phone. They both look to plug loopholes to reduce waste. And of course, if either borrows money, like a student loan for you or a World Bank loan for a country, it absolutely has to be repaid with interest.
All right, Section 3, where the paths diverge. This is where we look at the big differences.
Now we get to see where these wallets operate on completely different playing fields. Consider the sources of income. Private income is voluntary and effort-based. You go to work, you earn a salary, or you generate a profit at a micro level. But the government? It operates at a macro level, pulling in revenue across the entire economy. And here's the kicker. That public revenue, like taxes, is compulsory. You don't get to choose whether or not to pay your taxes. The government has the legal authority to collect them to fund public welfare, whereas your private spending is just for your own personal or business needs.
And that brings us to probably the most impactful difference: how they handle their income versus their expenditure. You and I, we have to keep our spending within our income. If we don't, we go broke. Governments, though, they can intentionally spend beyond their income. They can run on deficit financing, backed by some pretty wide legal borrowing powers. Also, public finance is entirely transparent. The budget is a formal, legally debated document open to the public. Your private finances, on the other hand, are strictly confidential.
So now that we've got a handle on the wallets themselves, let's jump into Section 4, the goods we buy, public versus private goods.
To really get what governments buy versus what you buy, we first need to grasp a core economic concept, and that is divisibility. This is simply the extent to which a good or service can be chopped up into smaller units and distributed to separate individuals.
Think about a divisible good. You can easily go to the store and buy just a single liter of milk or a bag of rice. You pay for your part and you consume it separately. But you definitely can't go to the store and buy just a tiny slice of national defense for your house, right? You can't buy a fraction of a streetlight just for your driveway. Those are indivisible goods. They have to be consumed as a whole by multiple people at the exact same time.
So let's see how this builds into the difference between private and public goods. Private goods, like bread, a car, or your mobile data package, are excludable. If you don't pay the market price, you don't get them. They're also rivalrous, meaning if I eat that loaf of bread, you literally cannot eat it. Public goods, however, are non-excludable and non-rivalrous. Think about law and order or a disaster warning system. If the government provides an early warning siren for a hurricane, everyone hears it. Providing it to one person automatically makes it available to everyone without diminishing its value for anyone else.
Which brings us to Section 5, spillovers and free riders. This is all about what happens when markets need a little help. Because sometimes the private market completely fails to provide what society actually needs, and that's exactly when the public wallet steps in. Have you ever been impacted by an action you had absolutely no part in? Well, in economics, that's called an externality. It's basically a cost or benefit that spills over onto a third party who didn't choose to incur it.
And these spillovers can go two ways. A positive externality is when an action benefits others. For example, when people get vaccinations, it reduces the overall spread of disease, which actually benefits even those who aren't vaccinated. Then you have negative externalities, which is when an action harms others, like a factory pumping out air pollution that damages the health of the neighbors next door. The free market doesn't naturally account for these spillover effects, so the government has to step in. They use the public wallet to correct these issues through taxes on polluters, regulations, or subsidies for things like vaccines to protect social welfare.
And then, of course, we have the free rider problem. Remember those non-excludable public goods like disaster sirens or national defense? Because you can't easily exclude someone from benefiting from them, people have a huge incentive to just consume them without paying. If a private company tried to sell national defense, nobody would voluntarily pay. They'd just hope their neighbors would foot the bill. Because of this lack of market incentive, the free market will wildly underprovide public goods. This is exactly why government taxation is necessary, to make sure everyone chips in for the things that keep society functioning safely.
Let's move into our final section, Section 6, the gray area. Time for some twists and mixed goods.
Based on everything we've just discussed, you might easily assume that anything non-rivalrous and non-excludable has to be created and funded by the state. But is that actually true? Are public goods always government goods? Surprisingly, no. Public goods are defined purely by how they're consumed. Remember, non-rivalry and non-excludability, not by who makes them. Open source software like Linux is freely available to everyone without exclusion. Wikipedia is funded by private donations, yet it acts as this massive public good available to all without rivalry. Even a local cafe providing open public Wi-Fi is offering a form of a public good. So nonprofits, private firms, and regular citizens absolutely can and do supply public goods.
Finally, we land in the ultimate gray area, quasi-public or mixed goods. These are things that show characteristics of both the private and public wallets. Think about education, public healthcare, or roads. You totally could exclude someone from a private school, making it a private good. But because an educated, healthy population creates massive positive externalities, huge beneficial spillovers for the whole country, the government steps in. They heavily subsidize or directly provide these goods, blurring the lines between the two wallets to make sure there's equitable access for everyone.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want you to think about your own household budget today. You're bound by the iron rule of private finance. Your spending has to fit within your income. But knowing that the government uses its macro-level authority to borrow and run deficits to fund the public goods we all desperately rely on, ask yourself this: how long do you think the public wallet can safely run on deficits for the greater good before the scale tips? It's a massive balancing act that defines the economic health of our entire world. Thanks for exploring this with me today.